Hello, we're going to show you how to screen print a multicolor image on a shirt using a 4-color press from printingplans.com, although these principles will apply to any press you use. We'll save the alignment of the screens for another video. We're going to start with how to get your platen sticky, which is important in being able to keep the shirt in place while printing. If you're going to print multiple colors or do multiple passes of the same color, the image will be blurry or misaligned if the shirt's not held in place. There are two main methods to get a sticky platen. One is to use a spray glue, the same type you'd use to glue paper onto cardboard, for instance. I don't really like using this kind of glue because it gets the press itself sticky and then it gets full of lint and dirt. It also doesn't reclaim well once the glue gets full of lint from your shirts. The other method is to use a Platen Glue, which is a white glue similar in appearance to Elmer's glue. What you're seeing here is a platen that already has some of this glue on it, but is full of lint and is being cleaned, but we'll show you how to apply the glue as well in just a minute. But first, to reclaim glue that's already on the platen, you just spray it with water, and then you can use your hand to rub off the lint that's on there. While it's wet, it won't be sticky, so you'll need to make sure it dries before you start printing. Periodically, the glue still won't be strong enough after cleaning it, so you'll need to apply some more. To do this, pour out a small amount of glue. You'll want to avoid very much skin contact with the wet glue because it might be harmful, so check the label of your brand just to make sure. If you want to use your hand to spread it, use a latex glove, but make sure it's tight, as wrinkles in the glove will make it hard to get the glue smooth. Otherwise, use a piece of cardstock or an old business card as shown here. If you pour too much as I did here, you can put some back in the container if it's not mixed with residual lint. So now scrape the card in multiple directions to get a smooth finish. Bumps in the glue will affect your image quality, so make sure to smooth them out. At this point, you can either wait several hours for the glue to dry, or you can heat it up if you need to print right away. You can use a heat gun like the kind you would use to strip paint, or you can use a flash dryer. And if you're not sure what a flash dryer is, we'll show you later in this video. Here we're using a heat gun and we're systematically going up and down the entire platen to make sure it all gets heated. Heating it to over 180 degrees Fahrenheit seems to get the job done, so we're using an infrared thermometer to make sure we're getting to at least that temperature. Once finished, the platen's actually going to be too sticky. If you try to print right now, it's going to be very hard to get your shirt off, and you might stretch your shirt as you're taking it off. This is especially true if you have multiple passes because of a multicolored shirt. We're actually going to put a little bit of lint back on the platen to reduce its stickiness just by getting an old shirt and pressing it down on the platen many times, maybe 20 or more. We're now ready to do some printing. We're using some plastisol ink here, which means that the ink won't dry on the screens and can be left there for very long periods. The ink may seem to thicken a touch when it sits for long periods, which is called false body, but a few passes of the squeegee will loosen it up and bring it back to its normal viscosity. Also, any contact that the plastisol ink has with porous material, such as wood or paper, will dry it out. You should have already determined how high you want the image on your shirt, and then made a mark on the platen arm as to where the shirt should be placed. I find it easiest to put the shirt on a little too far, and then pull it back towards myself into position, making sure it's centered. How perfectly you want it centered is up to you. I tend to be very particular about this, as I dislike receiving a t-shirt and discovering the images unintentionally off to the side by quite a bit. Now, unless you've printed this design earlier in the day and are coming back to it, I feel it's a good idea to print each screen on some newsprint first. The purpose of this is to get rid of any residue on the bottom of the screen that sometimes seeps out of the ink, and to restore the image to perfect detail if it's gotten a little fuzzy or blurry. You can also see if there are any pinholes in your screen rather than discovering this on the shirt itself. Also, never leave the paper on the back of the screen or this will dry out some of your ink. You'll notice on this last piece of newsprint that there's some residual blue ink on it, and I'll explain later in the video why that is. One more note about using this paper is that you can put two papers together, ink sides facing each other, to be able to use them one more time. Before we start printing the shirt, let's talk for just a moment about the actual printing process relative to pulling the squeegee. There are three main factors which will affect your print outcome: angle, pressure, and speed. There are other factors such as the type of squeegee you're using and the screen setup, but right now we're talking about the actual printing process. Let's talk about the angle first. Squeegee angle refers to the angle of your squeegee relative to the screen. A 45-degree angle is fairly standard for printing, but as you move the squeegee up towards a 90-degree angle or straight up, you will get better detail, but you'll be putting down less ink and you'll need to pull the squeegee multiple times to get a bold image. As you move the squeegee down towards the screen, you'll be laying down more ink, but you'll run the risk of losing detail in your image. So your aim is to find that sweet spot of laying down enough ink but still retaining detail. In the case of this shirt, a higher angle seems to work better, but we'll have to pull the squeegee multiple times. Always pull the squeegee straight back, because if you go at an angle, it might affect the position of your image as it goes down on the shirt. On rare occasions, you might use this to your advantage if the screen alignment is off. Now let's talk about pressure, or the force you're applying to your squeegee. As a rule, you want to give solid, even pressure across the squeegee in order to get a bold, even print. Sometimes this requires putting some weight into it, and if you're printing a lot in one day, you might start to feel it in your forearms and your abs even. It's possible to apply too much pressure, which will result in the squeegee blade bending and therefore changing the angle. Another note about pressure is that you'll want to make sure your hands are evenly spaced from the middle to make sure your pressure is even. If you put too much pressure on one side of the squeegee, it'll either make one side of your image darker, or it could slightly alter the placement of your image. The third consideration in the printing process is the speed in which you pull the squeegee. Out of the three considerations we're discussing now, this is probably the least important, but it still makes a difference. The goal is to have a smooth pull with even pressure, and that is most likely to be achieved when going at a fairly quick, even pace. If you go too slowly, your squeegee might catch a little bit, and your image quality will suffer. A good pull will probably take less than a second. This image we're printing is called the Impossible Squid and is one of the newer designs in my t-shirt line called Scatterbrain Tees. The bottom layer is the main image and is a light on dark print, meaning the ink is lighter than the shirt. This kind of printing is a little more challenging than a dark on light print because it can be harder to get good contrast. For that reason, we're going to take some extra steps to get this main image to show up. Here you can see we've got a good looking initial print, but it's not very bright. More pulls of the squeegee would help, but to really get it to pop, we're going to flash cure or soft cure it. This means we're going to heat up the image to the point that the ink is dry to the touch, but it would still wash out partially in a washing machine. A soft cure happens at about 180 degrees Fahrenheit or more. In this first instance, we're going to show you how to do this with a heat gun, but later in the video we'll show you how to use a flash dryer. A heat gun works perfectly fine, it's just a little bit slower, and you want to make sure to get the entire image or you'll have a spot that isn't as bright. An infrared temperature gun is really helpful here, but if you don't have one, you can touch the ink lightly to see if it's dry. The reason we're soft curing the ink is that the ink will print more brightly on dried ink than it will on the fabric itself. Now that the ink has been flashed or soft cured, we're going to do another pass or two with the squeegee, and you'll see how much brighter the ink is now. When printing multiple colors on the same shirt, you have a choice as to whether to soft cure one layer before moving on to the next. For speed reasons, whenever you can, it's good to not have to soft cure. This is called wet on wet printing, and it often yields great results. Other times, wet on wet printing will result in a muddy image or loss of detail. Usually when printing a new image, I'll try wet on wet first, and then if it doesn't look good, I'll resort to flash curing. In the case of this layer, flash curing was deemed necessary, so we're going to use the flash dryer to soft cure this layer a second time. We showed you how to use the heat gun just so you'll know how, but normally we use the flash dryer as it's faster and more thorough. This particular machine has a square area that's heated underneath, so we're going to have to heat it in two sections. Here's a close-up of the image so you can see the detail we're getting. You'll also see how the image will continue to pop as we add the other layers. This second layer is a blue ink that serves as a kind of reflected light or secondary light source on the image. We're going to pull the squeegee a few times to get it bright enough. Nor does the blue go directly onto the shirt. If it did, it would be a lot dimmer than the blue on the dry ink. This could be done for a purposeful effect if desired, but I chose not to do that here. Now we're not going to soft cure this color, the reason being that in tests we did without it, the image wasn't affected, which means it's not worth taking the time to do it. That means that the final screen will pick up a little bit of the blue ink on the back of it, but that's not a problem. This third screen is a yellow highlight that really helps give the image a 3D effect. We definitely don't need to soft cure this one because we're done printing the shirt, and we'll do the final cure after we've taken it off the platen. A full cure or final cure happens at about 320 degrees Fahrenheit. You can use the heat gun or the flash dryer for the final cure, but I don't recommend using the heat gun because it's hard to get every single spot. Any spot you miss will wash out. A flash dryer will definitely work for your final cure. Just use your infrared thermometer to make sure it's gotten up to 320 degrees or more. I have a conveyor dryer, which is the most desirable option for curing shirts, which I'll show you in a moment. You can have it running and place the shirts on it as you print them, but with slower to print shirts like the one we just did, I personally prefer to prolong the life of the machine and conserve some power. So I place the final shirts on this homemade rack in the meantime, and then when I've got a good amount printed, I send them through the conveyor dryer. This particular machine I found through a classified ad for $500. So keep checking your local classified ads and you might be able to find a similar deal. Use your temperature gun and check the first few shirts that come out to make sure they're getting to temperature. You'll want to aim the gun just inside where the shirts exit to get the reading at the hottest point in the process. You can also use a standard oven to get your final cure by placing the shirt on a cookie sheet with the excess fabric folded underneath. You can buy large cookie sheets and fit 2 shirts on each one and then put both in the oven at the same time and therefore have 4 shirts in the oven at once. You'll want to make sure you use a well-ventilated oven so your house doesn't fill with fumes. Although initially I used this method, I can't vouch for the safety of curing your shirts in an oven that you're also using for food. Most companies will claim that their inks are safe, but I'm not going to guarantee it. So these are the basics of shirt printing as well as some additional tips to help you get a great quality print. There are a lot of steps to take to get to the beginning of this process, and I hope to make more videos soon detailing these processes. Write in the comments what else you'd like to learn, and thanks for watching.